So the way to let air out of the tire with a Presta valve is pushing on the little nut once it is dialed open. If it's closed, no air will come out. So I'm going to set this aside for a moment and show you the other type of valve stem. So this is the other type of valve stem. This is we call Schrader, or it's the style that's on automobiles. So it's a car tire valve. And what this has is a little pin on the inside that presses and makes it a one-way valve. So if you press on the pin, air will come out. You can use your finger for this if you have this type of valve, or you can also use, we're going to be working with sets of tire levers. This is, if you're not familiar with tire levers, this is a set of 3 tire levers. They usually come in sets of 3. We're going to use them to pry the tire off of the rim, and this one is packaged, and it has 2 ends, and one is a scoop end, and the other is a hook end, and those have uses when you're prying it off, but one use for the hook end is that you can poke it up into the pin of the Schrader valve and let the air out of the tire that way. So that's the valves, the 2 main valves that you're going to run across. So I'm going to be working on this wheel for the most part. So this is a sort of a typical road, that's going to be annoying, a typical road bike size wheel. And we'll talk about bike tire sizes as we get to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is let all of the air out of the tire. And when I say all, I mean all, because if you don't let all of the air out of the tire, it makes it really hard to get the tire off, can make it really difficult to get the tire off of the rim. So what I would do is push down and just sort of make sure I'm like sort of squishing the tire against the ground and on the top in order to get all of the air out of the tire. So once all of the air is out of the tire, there's one more little nut on the Presta valve that is helping to secure the valve in the rim. The Presta valve is a little skinny and it's a little delicate. And so when you're pumping up the tire on the other end of things, you just want to make sure that you don't put a pump on, especially, so this is a little teeny micro pump that you can use out on the road. And if you hook this up to the valve stem, it's not obviously how it hooks up, but bear with me, you could actually break the valve stem right off. So what you want to do is just make sure that this valve stem is supported either by your hand whenever you're putting a pump onto it. And then when you're pumping, that it's supported on the side opposite if you're pumping in a direction that's parallel with the ground and sort of perpendicular to the valve stem. So this little nut that I just took off helps hold this in place and helps it not retract back up into the tire when you're trying to put a pump on. The nut goes on there. So you take that off, you set it aside, and you save it for later. So then the next step, now that all the air is out of the tire, is to grab a tire lever. And depending on how tight the rim tire combination is, will determine whether you need to use 1, 2, or 3 tire levers. So sometimes you can get away with 1. Oftentimes it takes 2, and sometimes it takes 3. So what you do is with the scoop end of the tire lever on one side, and I'm going to be showing you this like so that it's facing you so that you can see. If I were doing this on my own without you watching me, I would be doing it on the side that you can't see. So that would be easier for me to maneuver. So what I'm doing is I'm going to take the tire lever and I'm going to, it has that really nice scoop profile, and that does the work for me, really. So what I do is I just stick it straight down, into between the rim and the tire, and that scoop is going to hook onto what's called the bead of the tire. And I want to do this near where there's a spoke. So right here, I'm in between two spokes. Here, I'm like right on top of one spoke. And so I do that, and then I can use the hook end to hook onto a spoke. So now I've pried a small area of the bead of the tire off of the rim. And then I'm just going to repeat that with the next tire lever. So what I do is I notice that where the tire dives back under the rim, behind the rim, I'm going to do that same thing. I'm going to stick the tire lever between the tire and the rim, and I'm going to hook it onto the spoke. I'm going to do that one more. Yep, go ahead.
Question. So
yes.
Do you start opposite from
the valve? Is that what you're asking?
Valve? Yeah.
That's a great question. You can. That's a great question, and I should have told you. So starting opposite from the. So here's the valve. Starting opposite from the valve is a perfectly fine place to start. Basically, where I would start is anywhere but right at the valve, because what you don't want to be doing is prying things around right at the valve. So I started about a quarter of a turn from the valve.
Perfect.
But opposite the valve is also. Do I go dark when you're
No, we can see you. We can see you no matter what.
Okay, great. So then I won't panic so much. I'll just reach a little more relaxed over to my computer. So yes, you can start anywhere. I would say from opposite the valve is a great place to start. Good question. So then the third tire lever is going to go in, and what I'm doing, it's the scoop is facing towards the tire. Third one's going to go in, and what I want to have show is exactly what just happened. Is one of the tire levers just fell out. You know that when the tire levers start to fall out, you've done your job, and you don't have to do any more work with the tire levers. So now I've gotten this whole area here pried over from the rim. So the next thing I do is what I call unzipping the tire from the rim. I don't know what other people call it. And what I do is, I know this is kind of like not a very wide view, but that's what we have. So I'll try to keep this in the camera frame. So what I'm going to do is take the tire lever, and I'm going to just run it along this is an old tire, the bead of the tire, and it's just unzipping it and pulling it away from the rim all around a full 360 degrees back to where I started. So now I have one side of the tire pried completely off of the rim, and that is a lot of the work, but not all of the work. So then the next thing that I'm going to do is I want to get the second bead of the tire off of the rim. And so the way that I like to do this is this part of the rim on the ground, I put my feet on either side of the spokes, and I don't put a lot of pressure. I just hold the rim down, anchor it onto the ground, 1 foot on one side and 1 foot on the other side. See if you can see what you're seeing. Go back. No, to be up. Okay. And then what I do is pull straight up on the tire while I'm holding the rim down with my left hand, and I'm pulling straight up on the tire. And what I start to see is a tiny bit of daylight between the tire and the rim. And once I see a tiny bit of daylight between the tire and the rim, I can push down, and the entire tire will, I can remove it from the rim. So that is sort of that's the taking the tire and the tube off, that step. Now what I want to do is I just want to show you, if I can. I don't know if I can exactly show you, but I don't know how well the resolution is. I think it's good. So on a bike tire, I'm pushing my finger down on the tire and I'm catching what I was talking about, the bead of the rim. There's one on either side. It's actually a wire, a metal wire that runs around the circumference on both sides, and that's what gets hooked onto the rim. And the rim, if you have a rim, if you take your finger and do this, you'll feel a hook. And so the bead of the tire and the hook of the rim, it's called a hook and bead system. It's a joint, and it couples and does, let's see if I can, does this. And so as the so what you're doing when you're prying the bead of the tire off the rim is you're prying it over and around. But when it's coupled, when pressure is applied to it, it doesn't just separate. So that's actually the joint that's holding your tire onto your rim, the hook and bead system. So now that we have a rim exposed, I will show you a couple of things. So the rim has something called rim tape, and it is protecting the inner tube from the sharp pokey bits. If I can peel it off, I can see if I can or not. I think this one isn't going to peel up, but I'll show you what I'm talking about. So on the inside of this rim, there is, sometimes it's a cloth tape and sometimes it's a rubber band, and this one has a rubber band, and it has a rim strip or a rim tape, and it's basically just a strip that goes into the center of the rim and comes out when you're, if you didn't have one. It's removable. And it is protecting the inner tube from the ends of the spoke that poke through, and also from the holes that are drilled into the rim that the nipples of the spoke that are attaching the spoke, that the way that the spokes are attached to the rim, so that these holes that are drilled into the rim at every place where there's a spoke, those are really sharp and would puncture an inner tube if it were inflated against it without some sort of protection. So the rim strip is really important. So it's a nice thing, if you have your tire and tube off, it's nice to inspect your rim strip and just make sure it's intact. Make sure that it's sitting in the center of the recess of the rim and that it hasn't slid to one direction or the other and isn't exposing one of those holes or exposing one of the edges of a spoke. So there are two main, I like to break flat tires down into two main categories, two main reasons why you get a flat tire. Obviously, there's probably many more ways you could get a flat tire, but I like to think of there are external flats you can get where something is poking in from the outside world into your tire and then into your tube and popping it that way, or making a little hole and letting the air out. So that would be glass in the road, a nail, a staple, something coming in from the outside and puncturing. Or if your tire gets ripped, so not the exterior of the tire gets ripped, that can allow debris in to poke holes into the tube. That's an external flat. There are also internal flats. Internal flats would be caused by something going on inside the system that you can't see until you take it apart. So if one's rim strip had shifted over time, and that can happen, we'll get to that in a little while, sort of why things like that would happen. That can cause a flat tire, or if there's anything sharp on the inside of the rim. That can cause a flat tire. I actually have a nice little example. I don't know if you can see this. Tell me if you can or can't. There's a little rip in the rim strip, right? My finger's covering it, and then I let go. There's a little rip in the rim strip, and pretty soon that's going to split apart and expose this part of the rim to the tube. So if I were being a conscientious bike maintenance person right now, I would get myself a new rim strip to put in here. Not going to tonight.
Do you advise that from time to time we take the tire off and check that?
You know, it's funny. I don't really. It's more it's sort of opportunistically when you have a flat tire, it's a great time to check. So and it's a really good question. If you have a bike that's been sitting around for 5 or 10 years, and the tubes and tires are still good, and you pump them up and they're holding, that might be a time to check things out. But a flat tire, once you learn how to fix it, isn't the end of the world. So if you don't, I like to not open up a tire if I don't have to. So even though I could see where you would maybe think that would be a good idea in theory, I would say, no, hold off. If you get a flat tire, you can do an inspection. So this is a pretty old system, and before I installed this on a bike, I would probably have checked it, just because this hasn't actually been on a bike in a long time. This rim strip that's on this bicycle, and the rim strip that I'm holding in my hand for show is a rubber band style. They do tend to break over time, and they break especially right at you can see this one was just ready to go, where there's been a hole made for the valve stem to go through. They tend to rip right there where it's really sort of delicate. So if it's going to go, it usually goes there, even though you can see mine is about to go somewhere else. There is another type of rim strip. I don't think I have an example of it, but you can just imagine a roll of cloth tape. That's another style of rim strip. They are both very inexpensive. The cloth tape costs a few dollars more than the rubber band. If you're going to bother ever to replace your rim strip, go ahead and get the cloth tape style, and that actually is that's pretty much once you put it in, it's not going to rip or wear away over time. And if you're going to ask me why they don't all come with that, I don't have an answer for you. Okay, so internal flat, external flat. When you get a flat tire, you do want to try your best to find out what caused the flat tire. You can't always find out. For example, tonight, I just let the air out, so we would never find it. But if you do get a flat tire, especially, if it's whatever caused that flat tire, if that doesn't get taken care of, that's going to cause the next flat tire. So if there's a piece of glass that wheedled its way through the tire into the tube and it's still stuck in the tire, that's going to happen to the next tube that you put in there. If there's an internal problem that's happened and you don't catch it and you change out the tube, you're going to have another flat tire. So an inspection of the rim strip, and it's just a really cursory inspection of the rim, and then sort of where we put our time and energy is with the tube and the tire, trying to figure out. It's more common to have an external flat tire than an internal flat tire. So if we had an actual flat tire, there would be a small hole in this tube. And what I would do in order to try to figure out what happened is I would pump up the tube with a pump and go until I hear that sound. And then I would use my ears, and I would use a combination of my senses. So I would use my ears and also feeling. So the very downy, fine sort of fine hair on your cheeks can really sense airflow really well. So I have my ear here, and I have my cheek very close to the tube, and I'd be rotating it around. It wouldn't be in the tire at this point. I would have pulled the tube out, and I'd be rotating it around until okay, that's where the hole is, and then I would inspect the tube where I see the hole, and then I would inspect the tire in that area to see if I could find what was poking through. Sometimes something pokes in and back out, and you're not going to find it. So sometimes it's just a mystery, but oftentimes you can find something poking into the tire. And what you can do is sort of pinch the tire like so, and it'll expose kind of cracks, and you might see something glinting, and you can pick it out. What you can also do is to do an inspection. I'm going to pull the tube out. This is what you'd be doing if you were changing out a flat. You'd be pulling the tube out. This has seen better days. And then what I would be doing is I would be inspecting the inside of the tire visually in order to try to figure out and just make sure everything looks good in there. Tires
I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
When you talk about checking the tire with the cheek and your ear, trying to figure out where the puncture is.
Yeah.
Do you keep the tube inside the tire, or do you inflate it?
I would probably inflate it not inside the tire. The reason why I would have it inside the tire is because then it would show you where in the tire that the puncture was. So what I'm doing right now is I'm attaching the pump to the valve, and I'm just going to pump this up just to sort of show you what that would look like. When it's not inside of the tire, the volume of the tube is not constrained, so it starts to look really weird, not what you're going to sort of expect from a tube. So it starts to get really sort of big and unwieldy, and it starts to get large because the volume, the pressure of the bike tire isn't exerted, and so it's not keeping it at the smaller volume. So it can get pretty big like this, and then eventually, as you're pumping and pumping and pumping, you would start, by now I would think you would start to hear it, and I'd say, oh, okay, here's the hole right here. And you could mark it with an X if you plan to patch it later. Otherwise, you can. So that's a recommendation is you can patch a tire and tube. You can patch a tube. A patched tube is, in theory, just as good as a new tube. But if you do plan on doing a patch, my recommendation is that you don't do it while you're out on a ride. It takes patience, and it takes about 10 minutes. And so oftentimes when you get a flat tire, it's sort of when you least expected it. So what I recommend is if you plan on biking somewhere where you can't just get yourself to a bike shop to have it repaired or get yourself home easily, is carrying a spare tube with you in order to replace it. And then if you want to patch it, do that at home at your leisure when you're doing something else that you're not in a hurry. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Also, are you going to be showing how to patch the tube here?
We're going to find, I don't know, I might run out of time, so I may or may not have time to show how to patch.
Cool.
I'm going to try to, because I want to go methodically through how to put this all back together.
Right.
So,
okay. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you. Okay, so putting it back together. So now we've ostensibly, potentially maybe found the cause of the flat. We've gotten a fresh tube. So tubes do come in various sizes, and how to tell what size tube you need is to look on the side of your tire, and I'm going to try to find it on this one. somewhere on the sidewall of the tire, there's a bunch of writing. There's going to be a brand name. There will be the size. So this one is, I'm going to read it out loud to you, and then I'll try to show you. And it either will or won't show up on the camera. But this one says I can't even read it's a Tandem is the model name. 700 by 30C, that's the size. And then underneath it says 100 PSI, and that's how much pressure to pump this tire up to. So the 700 by 30C, 700 is the bike wheel size that this tire belongs to. 30 is the tire width. So that's the tube that fits in here is gonna have to accommodate 30. And then, and so I have here an example of, just trying to find the right box if I have one. 700 by, well, I'll just show you a different example. And then this was a Presta valve. So you need to know the valve style, Presta or Schrader, the bike wheel size. So for a mountain bike, it's usually a 26-inch. For a road bike, it's most commonly a 700C. There are other sizes, and they're always written on the side of the tire, and then they're always written on the box that the bike tube comes in. So this one says, it says Presta, and then it says 700 by, and it'll give a range of the width. And as long as the width that you're looking for falls within that range, you can use the tube. So this one would be a little bit too narrow because it says 700 by 23 to 25C. So this one would be a little bit narrow. And then I have one that would be a little wide. This is a 700 by 35 to 42C. So it would be a tube that was in a box that was marked sort of right in the middle of those two. Hey,
India?
Yeah.
I have a question. I keep getting burned on valve length. I keep getting these super long valve stems, and I feel like it's not actually advertised anywhere when I'm buying the tube.
Yeah.
And I know it's for those special super weird rims, but...
Yeah. So that's a really fair question, Dar. So there's sort of like a standard length of a valve stem, and these are old enough where it's not marked on the box. What Dar is talking about is this rim is a certain height to it, and so where the valve stem sticks out of the rim, the valve stem needs to be a certain length to be able to poke through and then poke out long enough so that your pump can get a purchase onto the valve stem. So if you have what's called a deeper rim, a rim with a cross section that's a lot deeper than this one, you would need to get a valve, and this is getting a little bit like into more detail than maybe I would have gone into, but it's a very fair question. So if you have a really deep rim, you need a much longer valve stem. A longer valve stem is not going to hurt anything. It's fine. It's really, you just want to make sure you have the minimum length that you need in order to get a pump on there. If you have one that's too long, it might just look funny, but it's fine. But somewhere when you're at the bike shop, in days when you're able to talk to a salesperson or talk to somebody at the bike shop, you could definitely ask this question over the phone or through the glass. You could show them your rim and ask them what length valve stem you need to get. So this is sort of like this is an example of sort of on the shortish size. They can get up to this long. Did that answer? And then I've never seen longer Schrader valves. They may exist, but this is like the standard Schrader valve length that I am aware of. So it's really the Presta valve stems that vary in length in order to accommodate different rim depths. Did that help, Dar?
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay.
I had one question. So, how much should I be looking to pay for a new tube? Like, does the quality matter a lot?
No, I don't think the quality matters a lot. I think it has to do with, here's my recommendation, is that tubes are relatively inexpensive. I actually have no idea. I haven't bought one in years and years and years.
I just bought one online, and they were more expensive than I thought. They were like $8.
Yeah, that's what I was going to guess. I was going to guess something between, like, if you're not buying them in great quantities, my guess was going to be something between like $7 and $10 is my guess. At a bike shop, it might even be a little bit more, but what I was going to say in answer to that question, them, and my sort of stock standard answer for that is go to the bike shop that's in your neighborhood that you want to support. They're all really great, but the one that's most convenient for you is the one that you're going to want to see stay in business and the one that you're going to want to go to. So sometimes spending a few extra dollars to support, so the bike shop has to mark theirs up so that they can keep their lights on and pay their employees. And their margins are very tight on bicycles, so they tend to make their money on accessories and smaller items. So even though it might cost a couple dollars more to get one at a bike shop, my suggestion and my sort of encouragement to all of you would be to patronize a local bike shop that you can cultivate a relationship with and help support and have them stay in the community. That said, if you're really tight, especially sometimes as graduate students, money is very, very tight. So you might be able to find them a little cheaper online, and I wouldn't worry too much about the quality. I would, if the site has good reviews, I would say it's probably fine. It's just sometimes it's easier at a bike shop to ask the person working, is this really going to work with my tire? They can help you decipher some of the coded language on the side of the tire and make sure it's really going to be a good match. Okay, so we're at 8 o'clock. We've got half an hour to go. We've got to get this back together. So we've gotten our flat. We've figured out why potentially. We have taken a piece of glass out of our tire. So now what we're going to do is and so what I'm using as a pump this is what I would have at home. I would not have this out on the road with me. Is a nice big floor pump that I can stand on the base, and it fills up a tire really quickly. This one I like a lot. I am not I have no skin in the game. I don't, if you find a pump that you like, just use it and stick with it. I've had this is a Toe Peak Joe Blow pump that's worked well for me over the years. And so I like to recommend it only because I like to use it, not because there's any benefit for me if that's the pump that you get. This pump is kind of nice because it has a head sorry, I'm like talking to myself, my little picture down there. It has a head that can accommodate both either or. The little gray side can accommodate a Presta valve, and then there's a larger hole for the side that's colored black that accommodates a Schrader valve. And then it has a lock mechanism that when I put it onto the valve, different locks on different pumps work differently. Sometimes the lock goes toward the valve stem, sometimes the lock mechanism is away. It just depends on what's going on inside with the valve. So on this particular pump that I'm using, in order to lock it on, the lock lever goes away from the valve stem. So this is neutral. I'm going to take the Presta side, push it. It's just I make sure that the nut is open, and then I manually push it onto the tube. And yes, I'm starting this process with the tube outside of the tire, just to give the tube enough body so that it's just slightly less floppy than it was when it had absolutely no air in it at all. So here it sort of maintains its shape just a tiny bit, and it's a nice, just sort of a nice tire sized. The next thing I'm going to do is orient myself on this tire. I'll talk just briefly. I'm going to use my other wheel as an example. So some tires are directional and some are completely symmetric and have no direction to them, the direction of the rotation. So the general rule of thumb for front tires is that if there is a V shape to the tire tread, the V is going to point toward the front. If you are on the bike, riding the bike, toward the front of the bicycle, the V shape of the tire tread is going to point that way. So this tire that I have has little V-shaped tread markings. And so if I were riding the bicycle, this is the way that this wheel would go on. And if I put it in this way, it wouldn't make a whole lot of difference. I probably wouldn't notice. Sometimes there is like water shedding qualities. But the only thing you might notice is that your quick release, if you have a quick release style wheel attachment, you want the lever side to be on the non-drive side of the bicycle. So the bike has two sides. It has a drive side with all the gears and chain and stuff, and it has a non-drive side. And the lever on the front wheel actually makes no difference. It's a convention. It goes on the non-drive side. On the rear wheel, it does make a difference because if you need to have the gears will be on one side of the wheel, and the lever you want to be on the other side so that it doesn't interfere with the gears on the bicycle. So the lever of the quick release for attaching the wheel will be on the non-drive side. And so when you put the tire back on the rim, you want to orient it correctly if possible so that the lever of the quick release is on the non-drive side. And if that just kind of like went too fast and over, you can rewind this in the future and watch it or look it up from another source. Okay, so what I was doing was orienting, trying to figure out how I was going to have the wheel and the tire. So this tire has V shapes going this way, and this is the front wheel, and I'm going to just guess that it goes this way because I don't have the quick release skewer in. So then what I'm going to do is so I don't know if you remember, but it's already lost its air because it got pushed. Okay, just a teeny bit of air in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the tube back into the tire, and I'm just going to tuck it in all the way around, all the way. And that's how it was when I took it off. And this is not usually something you do while people are watching you. I've done it a lot with people watching me, but it doesn't ever get less awkward. So this
Hey, I'm just going to poke in and welcome Kathy.
Hi, Kathy. Thanks for joining us. So what we've done, my name is India. I'm the instructor. Dar is the host who is helping me administer this and notice when people come and go and have questions. What we've done so far, we did some introductions. So I got the other participants' names and how they heard about the class. And then we've talked about getting a flat tire, how you might get a flat tire, how you take the tire off of the rim of the bicycle. I'm going to pause for a second. And then simulating a flat, finding out maybe why you got a flat, and then we're starting in on the second half of getting the tube back into the tire and then back onto the wheel. So what happened right here, it doesn't happen that often, but I did manage to do a complete twist. The tube is like completely twisted. So what I'm going to do, and if I were to just put it in like completely twisted, that could be an issue. So what I'm going to do, and I think think it was sort of a faux twist. So you just want to check and make sure that you don't have a weird twist. Okay, so once the tube is in the tire, and it doesn't love to stay there because of gravity, then I find the valve stem, and then I look at the wheel, and I find the hole that's drilled into the rim that can accommodate the valve stem, which is right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to poke the valve right through the hole, the valve stem right through the hole. And then how do I describe? So this is a little easier to teach in person when I can kind of get everybody like on the other side of things. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, and again, I would be doing this facing me. I would be sitting where you are doing this onto this tire if I were doing this on my own and not trying to present it. So what I'm doing right now is I'm taking the side of the tire that's facing you, and I'm doing it the way that I would do it, and you're just seeing it in opposite. So I'm taking the bead of the tire, and I'm hooking it over the side of the rim. And I will pause when I get that completely done, one side of the tire over. So I got one side of the tire completely hooked into the rim, and the other side of the tire is still completely out, just like when we first, with the tire levers, pried off one side of the tire. So we're sort of halfway there. So then what I'm going to do, I forget who asked the very good question in the beginning, sort of where do you start? Do you start near the valve? Do you start away from the valve? What I'm going to do is I'm going to start away from the valve so that at the end, I end up when I'm sort of cranking on this whole system, trying to make it fit. I'm not going to be doing that right at the valve stem. So I'm going to try to start right at the valve, and this I'm doing opposite. I'd be where you are sitting and facing the wheel and tucking. So what I'm doing is I'm tucking just inch by inch, I'm tucking the bead over the edge of the rim, and I'm about halfway there. And I'm pausing at the valve stem just to make sure that the tube is really up and in the tire and not hung up and pulled down. And then I'm tucking and tucking and tucking and tucking. This sometimes is easy, and sometimes it gets really hard. Right about there, it's going to start to get hard. And that was a relatively, I made that look really easy because that was a relatively not tight tire rim combination. If you happen to have a tighter tire rim combination, that's going to be a lot more difficult, and I'm going to show you what you can do. So Kathy, this is what I was showing in the beginning, was using a tire lever to pry one bead of the tire off of the rim. I'm just going to do this. I'm not going to take the whole thing off again. I'm just going to get a little section to where it would be when it got really hard. So now I've tuck, 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 and on a really tight tire rim combination, you might not be able to get this last bit in. So what you're going to want to do, you can try two things. First is you're going to stop using you're not going to use your thumbs because you could sprain your thumbs, and you're going to stop using your fingers. And what I'm going to be doing, now I have to turn it around. Let's see if I can show. This is the process. What I'm going to be doing is taking the heel of my hand, just where I want it to go up over the rim. I'm going to be taking the heel of my hand and sort of smearing this up and over like that. And I might be having to use two heels of hand to do that and get it over. If that didn't work, all is not lost. Sometimes that doesn't. Sometimes you just end up with a hand that hurts a little bit. What you can do is you can use your tire lever in reverse. So instead of sticking it in and prying the tire off, what you can do is, in order to pry it off, I had the scoop end pointed toward the tire. Now I'm going to use it like a shoehorn, and I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to put it, the scoop end facing away because it's eventually going to be facing the tire, and point it down, and then I'm going to, no, the other way around, like a shoehorn, the scoop facing the rim, hooking on the rim, and going up and getting that, popping that in. And sometimes you have to do that a few times before you get that really hard, that section that didn't want to go back in. And now I'm done putting the tire onto the rim, but I'm not quite done. Now what I want to make sure is that between the bead of the tire, and which is metal and encased in the rubber of the tire, and the rim, which is metal, that we're not trapping any tube between those two things, because if we are, when we go and pump up, fill up the tube with air, it's going to explode, and I can show you an example of what that would look like. It might look something like this. No, this is the wrong example. What that's going to look like is, I don't have an example of it, but I can explain it to you. It's going to look like what's called a pinch flat or a snake bite. It's going to look like two little slits in the tube because it's getting pinched between the rim and the tire, and it's getting two little bite marks. So if you see two little bite marks, one way that can happen is because a little bit of tire and of tube was pinched. So what I'm doing is a visual inspection. So I take the tire and I'm going to pinch it away from the tube and take the tire and pinch it away from the tube so that I can just get a little eyeball. And so what I would look like when I'm doing this, I would be standing above and looking at it and just doing that all the way around. So I would start at the valve, and then I would go back. I would be doing a visual inspection on either side of the tire, making sure I'm not seeing tube. And you can do this pretty cursory. And then I would get all the way back to the valve and know that I'm not going to get a pinch flat from my own doing. The next thing I'm going to do is pump up the tire. So I'm going to lock that on. And I'm going to pump. I am not going to pump it up fully. So in order to figure out how much eventually you're going to want to pump up your tire, again, it's going to be written on the sidewall of the tire. This one says a 100 PSI, and I do have a gauge on my pump. And you do want to eventually have a pump with a gauge that you can use to get to maximum pressure. But what I'm first going to do is pump it up to about just half pressure. And the reason I do this is to make sure that that's just my valve, is to make sure that that joint that we talked about earlier between the bead of the tire and the hook of the rim is actually, that the tire is seated in the rim all the way around. So I'm doing another visual inspection. I'm starting at the valve, and I'm just turning the tire around, the wheel around, to visually inspect the tire, just to make sure that at no point does it look like the tire is kind of womping up above the rim. And it would be pretty obvious. It would just kind of like go like that. And it isn't that common, but when it does happen, if that is the case, so that would mean that the bead of the tire wasn't really hooked into the rim, and so it was kind of up a little bit. If I went to max pressure, I would blow out the tire. I would blow out the tube. It would basically get an aneurysm, and it would make a sound like a gunshot. So it's scary. It's not fun, and it makes this is what it will look like for that tube. This is an example of a tube that the tire wasn't seated on so I don't know if you can see, there's like a really big gash in the tube. It's about 5 or 6 inches long and completely blew out. So that happens pretty catastrophically. So if I were to find that were the case, that I didn't think that the tire was well seated on the rim at some point, what I would do is just go ahead and let the air out of the tube gently. And then once the air is all out of the tube, I would just go to that spot and just kind of go like this, and you'll usually hear a little pop, and that'll be the beat of the tire seating itself inside the hook of the rim. And then you can go ahead and fill up halfway, visually inspect, make sure everything looks good, and if it does, then you get the green light to fill up to max pressure. And that's the resolution of fixing a flat tire on a wheel. There are definitely little things that you might have questions about, or big things. So it's 8:15. We have 15 minutes. I do have time. We could quickly run through a patch demonstration, or I could field some questions. Does anybody have questions at this point?
I might have a stupid question. So
No, there are none.
I have a road bike, and it's written on the tire that I have to inflate it at 100 psi.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I ever inflated at 100 psi. I always go to 40, 60, 80 or something like that because I have this impression that it will get too hard.
Yeah.
So is that okay?
I love this question. This question has sort of two answers. One answer is there are different camps that people are in. So I am in the camp of, generally speaking, I recommend to people that they inflate their tires to near max pressure. So somewhere, if it says 100, I would go somewhere between 85 and 100, 90 to 100. As the pressure of the tube, so the tube is a balloon, and it has little pores in it. It's a latex balloon, and it has little pores in it just like a balloon that you would play with. And so if you blow a balloon up, the more pressure that balloon has, the quicker over time it's going to sort of, it wants to equalize back to 15 psi. So if you keep your tires inflated to 100, you just have to remember that you're going to have to, they'll probably go down to 80 or something over the course of a week or two, and you would just have to continually top them off, which is fine. That's one of the things that you check before you ride, is just to make sure you have decent pressure. The rationale behind airing up your tires and making sure that you're near to max pressure is that leaves the least amount of sort of room for things to move around. And it prevents the most common way that someone is going to get a pinch flat. So the most common way that people get a pinch flat is that their tires are underinflated, and as they go over the ground, what happens is, this is not underinflated. I'll show you on an underinflated tube. So this is an underinflated tire, and so what I'm hoping to demonstrate is that the ground is going to pinch the tire like this, and that's going to end up pinching the tube that's inside. It's going to end up pinching it between the ground and the rim, and that could, if you go over a big bump and your tires are, so if your tires are rated at 100 and you only have them at 40, I would say you're a good candidate to get a pinch flat if you go over a big bump, train tracks or a curb or something like that. So, something's going to happen like that. So I would say go up at least to 70 to 100. The reason why people, and then the other thing is that things aren't going to shift around. So if this is underinflated, it can do, I don't know if you can see this, but my valve stem is going like this as I ride. And sooner or later, that's going to wear out at the valve stem, and that's going to cause issues too. So this is an exaggeration. This is a really underinflated tire that I don't think any of us would probably be comfortable riding on. But this is a good demonstration of sort of on the on a smaller level, what's happening with an underinflated tire over time is things are really shifting around, and you can get abrasion, internal flats from abrasion because of chronic underinflation.
Yeah.
Some people don't like to have their tires inflated to maximum pressure because it is a little bit of a stiffer ride. And so if you're a lighter rider on a stiff bicycle, sometimes having your tires inflated to maximum pressure, you start to feel like your joints are getting like really jarred, and it's a kind of a harsher ride. And in that case, if the tire is rated to 100, you could go down to 90 or 80, and then just make sure that they don't go below that too often to prevent the other things that I talked about.
Okay, thank you. That's really, really good answer. Yes, thank you.
Great. And then mountain bike tires, oftentimes they'll have a range rather than just a max. And that has to do with the way that the terrain, so whether you're riding on hard packed terrain or sand or hopefully not mud, but softer terrain. So the acceptable range of inflation is oftentimes described on tires that have a range, and you can inflate it to anywhere in that range that you feel like gives you sort of the best feel of a ride. Okay, so where were we? Other questions before we jump forward to the patching? Okay, then I am going to pick a this has been this has been a demonstration. I've done several patches on this to varying degrees of success, depending on sort of how carefully I did it. So, so patches come in two main flavors. One is with adhesive already on them, and they're those are called glueless patches. They have glue on them, and those you just peel off like a sticker and you put them on the hole. So that's, in order to patch a tube, you do need to know where the hole is. If you can't find it, you can't patch it. So and then there are patch kits, and in a patch kit, generally they come in different sizes. There's more jumbo size patch kits, but this is sort of your standard patch kit. What comes in, can everyone see this pretty well? One person could answer.
Good.
Okay. All right. So inside of this patch kit, I'm just going to show you the contents. There's a little instructions, graphical, without words, that we'll talk through. There's a little piece of sandpaper. There's a tube of glue that will harden over time once it's been opened. So once you use a patch kit, you want to check it. If you're going to plan on using it in the future, you want to check and make sure you still have glue that hasn't dried up and gotten hardened. It's really rubber cement. And then put those down. Only have two hands. And then there's a number of patches. So some are round like this, and then there will be one or two that are more oblong that are meant for if you have a snake bite style or pinch flat. This could cover both of those punctures instead of trying to have two patches right next to each other that might overlap and be competing with each other. We're just going to we're going to pretend we have one hole in our tube, and we are going to patch it with one of these patches. So the graphical directions are good for reminding you the steps to take. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps denoted on here. The first one is just a graphic of a tube being dipped in some sudsy water. That's another way that you can find a hole. It just doesn't work out on the road because you don't usually have a basin of sudsy water. But if you take your tube with a hole home with you and you can't find the hole, you can pump it up full of air, dunk it into a sink full of sudsy water, and you'll start to see bubbles where the hole is. And that way you can find the hole. Then you're going to dry it off before you start patching it. The second thing is showing you roughing up the area around the hole with sandpaper. The main reason to do that is because with our grimy fingers, not even grimy, just natural oils or oils from the bike that we have on our fingers are being transferred onto the tube when we touch it. And we're usually touching it right around where the hole was when we're trying to find it. So what we're going to do is rough up a patch of tube that's just a bit bigger than it's a little easier to patch a tube that has that's wider, because then the patch doesn't like overextend over, but you should be able to patch a tube of any dimension. So what I'm doing is step 2 is roughing up a spot just a little bit larger than the patch, and it goes from shiny to matte, and that's when I know it's roughed up enough. The third step shows spreading the glue. So the bottle of glue has a toothpaste tube with a lid, and it's sealed to start with when you buy it, and it has a little pokey thing on the other side of the lid, and you use it to poke the glue and open it. And then what you do is, now I don't want to be touching this area, so I'm going to just be using the nozzle of the glue. This one's dried up. Okay. Well, I might have some. I might not. These are old. If I don't, we're going to pretend. I'll talk you through the rest of it. What happens is there's a little seam on the bottom that does let, eventually, as the years go by, air can get in and it evaporates. My guess is these are all going to be like this. So I'm going to pretend. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spread just a thin film of glue onto this, and it's going to start to look shiny again where the glue is. The next step we're not going to do for the sake of time because we have about 4 more minutes. But the next step, and this is crucial, this is a critical part of patching, and your patch won't do well unless you do this step. And so my patch isn't going to do so well because I don't have glue. But the next step, it says to wait for 5 minutes. So when you're out on the road, that feels like an eternity. So that's why I recommend you do this at home. But you wait 5 minutes and you're letting the glue get tacky because the glue does a chemical reaction with the rubber and kind of melts it, and it melts the patch right onto the rubber of the tube. And if the glue is still wet, it won't do that full chemical reaction and stay. So the patch has 2 sides. It has a top and a bottom. The top is covered with a clear cellophane so that you're, and then the back is covered with foil. So what you do is you can grab the corner, and you can grab, and this is a lot like a temporary tattoo. So you can grab the foil. The foil gets put in your pocket to throw away at home, and then the cellophane you can touch without touching you don't want to touch this part of the patch, the back that's going to meet the tube with the glue, because you want that to stay nice and grease-free as well. So then you're going to put the patch onto that area, and this is where this is just pretend because there isn't glue. And what I'm doing is just like a temporary tattoo, I'm sort of spreading out from the center to the edges all around to make it stick. And then what I'm hoping to see is sort of the edges that are marked in orange are going to kind of just like melt onto the tube and stick. And I'm going to do a magic trick. And then magic, there's a patch affixed to the tube. And when I pump it up, that's going to hold inside, and it's just like a new tube. So that was sort of record time. We have 2 more minutes. I am happy to take 2 minutes of questions, or I'm happy to give you 2 minutes of your evening back. It looks like there are only a couple people left anyhow. Okay. out. Well, it was a pleasure meeting all of you. I think they're all gone. Maybe.
No, I still have fun.
Okay, sorry. I don't know what it's like these funny.
No, wait.
I'm seeing these funny signals that say, I don't know what it means. Anyway.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Yes, thank you so much for being
Thank you so much for the class.